Hello dear students. In this class we are going to discuss one of the very important topics, that is measurement of serum calcium. Now calcium, as you know, is a very important parameter that in every lab we used to routinely measure, and you will have to measure. You have seen that calcium is measured in your central laboratory also. So today what we'll discuss only about the methods of estimation for serum calcium. What are the different ways, what are the different methods by which serum calcium can be measured. Okay. So before going to that, let's have a very brief idea about what are the different fractions in which the calcium can be present in serum. So one of the part, almost half of it, that is around 45% of the calcium, 45% of the calcium that is present in serum is around 45% is the free calcium, that is free ionized calcium, calcium that is not bound to anything. Sorry. The rest, around 55% total, is bound to something. And what is that something? Around 15% is bound to different anions, anions like sulfate, lactate, phosphate, etc. And rest 40%, the majority of the bound fraction is bound to proteins. And what protein? The main protein to which it is attached is albumin. So albumin has many sites where there are negative charges to which the positively charged calcium can bind. So around 45% is free ionized calcium and 55% is bound, of which 40% is bound to proteins, mostly albumin, and 50% to different anions, negatively charged ions. Now the important thing to remember here is that of these three forms, the free ionized form is the biologically active form. It is the free ionized calcium which is the biologically active form, which does all the actions that calcium do in our body, be that blood coagulation, be that muscle contraction, or whatever the actions, or cell motility, whatever the actions that calcium is involved in, it is the free ionized fraction that does all these actions. So obviously in the blood, the tight regulation of the calcium level also involves only the free ionized fraction. So it is the free calcium that is tightly regulated by the two major molecules that regulate calcium, that is parathyroid hormone PTH and vitamin D. So these are the two molecules that are involved in calcium regulation. So remember, the regulation is of the free ionized fraction because that is the biologically active one. The bound forms, they are not regulated tightly, but obviously that depends on there is a dynamic equilibrium between the free and the bound form. So the bound forms also remain usually with an equilibrium, with a more or less constant level with respect to what is the level of the free calcium. But the bound fraction can change depending on the amount of the things to which it binds. Most importantly, albumin. The thing is, if albumin level increases, then the bound fraction can increase. If the albumin level decreases, then obviously the bound fraction can decrease. So that may change a little bit, but the free fraction in a normal person in a physiological condition will always be tightly regulated because that is the active portion. Okay. Now we will not go into too much of detail of how calcium is regulated because today we are only focusing on the methods of estimation, but you know, as I have said, that it is vitamin D and PTH which mainly regulate the calcium level. The vitamin D, what it does is mainly it increases the uptake or absorption of calcium from the GI tract, also a little bit from kidney. And parathyroid hormone, it helps in the desorption of bone, so it releases calcium from bone, and both of them so ultimately tries to increase the blood calcium level and bring it to the normal reference range. And whenever there is a decrease in the calcium level, the PTH synthesis is increased. So anyway, we will not go into the regulation, but again remember that this regulation, this tight regulation of blood calcium level, mainly focuses on regulation of the free calcium level because that is the biologically active form. So now let us directly go into how we can measure the plasma calcium or serum calcium, the main topic of today's class, that how we can measure them. So again, if you want to measure calcium, then we can measure the free and bound two fractions separately. So how we can measure? The one thing that we measure is measurement of total calcium. We do not measure the bound calcium separately, but we measure the total calcium that is present, both bound and free together. So total amount of calcium. Or we can measure only the free calcium, which is the active, biologically active form in which the calcium is present in blood. So either we can take the total part, bound and free together, or we can measure the free calcium only, which is the active form. So let us now directly go to the analytical methods. Let us first discuss the total calcium. How do we measure the total calcium? In our labs, usually it is the total calcium that we measure most commonly. Now total calcium is measured usually by the spectrophotometric or colorimetric methods. Now spectrophotometric measures, as you know, we do for the methods of total calcium measurement, we do in either semi-auto analyzer or in the auto analyzer. So in our central lab also, we can measure the total calcium by semi-auto analyzer or auto analyzer by spectrophotometric methods. The two major spectrophotometric methods that are used to measure total calcium are orthochrysophthalin complexon, or in short OCPC method, and the second one is Arsenazo 3 method. Both of these two are very common methods. Different labs use different methods, and there are many different commercial kits available for each of the methods. In the central lab of NBMC, as you all know, Arsenazo 3 method is used, but in many labs also OCPC is also used. Okay, so let us see both these methods one by one, because in your exam each of them can come as a question, or both maybe. So let's first the OCPC. Okay, so what is the principle? The principle of the method. So at first what is done? At first the sample will be diluted with acid. So what will happen if we dilute it with little bit of acid? It will be present in the reagent setup. Obviously the proteins and the anions to which the calcium was bound, the bound form of calcium, what will happen if you add acid? Then there will be high level of protons. Acids will give you protons, H plus ion. So the H plus will go and bind to all those binding sites, and calcium will be released. So all those binding sites of proteins will be protonated. The amino acids will be protonated. Proton will go and bind, H plus will go and bind. So calcium will be released. So all the bound calcium will now be released. So your entire calcium is now in the free form. So now if you measure the calcium, you get the total calcium. Okay, so your 55% was bound and you release it. So now the free plus bound total amount is freed, and now if you measure the calcium, you get on the total amount. Okay, so now what happens in the next, the reagent, there will be an alkaline solution and OCPC. The OCPC reagent will bind with calcium in the alkaline solution, and they will form a reddish purple colored compound, a chromophore of reddish purple colored. So it's simple, you just release all the bound calcium, so you get the total calcium together, and then you give the OCPC reagent and you make the solution alkaline. So in alkaline medium, OCPC will bind with calcium, form a complex. That colored complex, that chromophore, is reddish purple in color, and you can simply measure it spectrophotometrically at 570 or 580 nanometer, whatever you have in your spectrophotometer. Okay, it's simple. And obviously by the Beers-Lambert law, you know, the proportion of color will be proportional, the intensity of the color will be proportional to the concentration of the calcium present. Okay, the main interference in this method, if you can remember, is magnesium. Magnesium is the main interference. If you can know this, if you can remember this, that is good. So magnesium is the main interference. Why? Because magnesium can also bind with OCPC to form a similarly colored complex. So it can give a false positive. If you have too much high level of magnesium, that can interfere with binding of calcium. How you can remove this interference? How you can correct it? You have to add another reagent, that is 8-hydroxyquinoline in the reagent, and then it will stop magnesium to bind or interfere with calcium binding. So that's it, simple. Now different kits will have their procedures little bit different, but this is the example that I am giving of the procedure is from one of the standard kits. So you can just stop the video here, write it down, this procedure, or you can just write the procedure from whatever kit is used in your lab currently. Okay, so any procedure, it's a standard procedure, so you can write it in the exam paper also if it comes in the exam. So this is how much buffer, how much color reagent, L1 L2 2 reagents, how much distilled water for blank, standard for standard, and test for the test sample, how much of which you have to mix, for how much time, at what temperature you have to incubate, and then obviously you know the absorbance of the test by absorbance of the standard into concentration of the standard, which in this case the concentration of standard in this case is 10 milligram per dl. So you multiply it with 10 and you get the result like any other spectrophotometric method. So it is simple. So next let us go to the Arsenazo 3 method. Again, first, what is the principle? The principle again is very simple, that at mildly acidic solution at pH of around 6, here in the previous method the reagent was OCPC, here the reagent is Arsenazo 3. The compound known as Arsenazo 3 will again bind with calcium and form a complex which has a bluish purple color, and again that color you can measure simply, just your reagent complexes with calcium forms a colored complex which is bluish purple in color, and you just measure the color spectrophotometrically. Here the wavelength you use, the filter you use is 650 nanometer. So previously you were using 570 or 580 nanometer for OCPC. For Arsenazo you measure it at 650 nanometer. Here the advantage with Arsenazo 3 method is that magnesium, which is the main interference in case of OCPC method, causes much less interference with respect to Arsenazo 3. And why so? Because the magnesium in the acidic pH in which we are doing this test, magnesium has a much less affinity for Arsenazo in comparison to calcium. So magnesium will not bind to Arsenazo much, so it will not affect the calcium binding. So the interference will be less. So obviously if you are asked which method is better, obviously the answer will be Arsenazo 3 is a better method. And why? Because magnesium, the interference of magnesium is much less, because magnesium do not bind much with the Arsenazo 3. So that's it. And again the procedure, how much of reagent, how much of standard blank or sample you have to add, for what amount of time you have to incubate, and then what is the calculation. That is again simple. You can stop the video here, pause the video here, and again write it down. Okay, so next, after the total calcium, let us come to the analytical method for measurement of free calcium. The free calcium is ionized free calcium is measured by the ion selective electrode or ISE method. It is the similar method by which we measure the sodium, potassium, chloride, etc. ions. So calcium ion also will be, only if you measure the free ionized calcium, you can measure by the same principle, that is ISE. So the common ISE machines that you will find in your laboratories, that is the AVL of Roche and the Transasia, both machines you can see here. And here you will have, there is one electrode that is always for sodium, one for potassium, and then there is a third electrode where you can have either chloride or lithium or calcium. So you can change it accordingly. If you give or put the calcium electrode there, then along with sodium, potassium, you can measure ionized calcium. So there are different companies, different types of machines, but ionized free calcium you can measure by ion selective electrode method. The bound form will not be measured by this method, so you only get the free ionized calcium. Okay. And the ISE method, there are different, I will not go into the detail of ISE method, but here just know the if you want to know little bit detail about the what kind of ion selective electrode is used here, then it is a liquid membrane containing ion selective calcium sensor. Okay, so I will not go into more detail of the exact ISE method used here. So now we know that how we have to measure the total calcium, how we have to measure the free calcium. So what are the reference ranges? What are the normal range or reference range of calcium? First, total calcium. The reference range for total calcium is 8.6 to 10.2 milligram per dl. Okay, and the free ionized calcium, that is, it will be around half of it, because around 50% is free calcium. So free calcium, the reference range in blood is usually 4.6 to 5.3 milligram per dl. So these are the two reference ranges. Very, very important. You have to remember these reference ranges. Next, another very important thing which may interfere or which may falsely give you wrong results, mostly with respect to the free calcium. The free or ionized calcium, the level may vary very much depending on the pH. So once you collect the sample, then if due to different reasons the pH of the sample changes, then the amount of free calcium may change. So you always want to measure the free calcium level in a sample which has the same pH, the pH that was present in the blood that was when inside the body. So once you take out the blood, due to different reasons, if the pH changes, then the free calcium level can also change. So how it is so? For example, think if the pH is increased due to some reason. If due to some reason the blood sample, after you have collected the sample, the pH has increased, so it has become alkaline. So what will happen? If it is alkalinized, if the pH has increased, then what will happen? Then from the protein sites where calcium can bind, in those sites more and more H plus will be released from there. If it becomes alkaline, then to counteract, more H plus will be released. So those sites will become negatively charged. If H plus is released, then those sites will become negatively charged, and then more and more calcium will go and bind to the negatively charged sites of the protein, that is albumin. So what will happen? Your free calcium level will decrease. Total calcium C does not changes. The total calcium remains same, but the bound fraction increases, because if you increase the pH, then what happens? The sites where calcium could have bound, which were protonated, which were bound to H plus, if you make the pH more alkaline, more than 7, 8, 9, 10, the H plus will start to get released. So those sites now become negative, and more of the free calcium go and bind there. So your free calcium level decreases. So if the pH changes, understand this, that the total calcium does not change, but the free calcium fraction will decrease if the pH becomes alkaline. And the reverse is also true. If your pH becomes acidic, if your pH goes below 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, more and more it becomes acidic, then more and more H plus is present in the solution, then more and more H plus will go and bind to the protein, that is albumin. So the negatively charged sites, they will bind with H plus, so they will no longer be able to bind with calcium. So more calcium from the binding sites will now be released, so the amount of free calcium will increase. So the bottom line is, if the sample becomes alkaline, pH increases, then free calcium level will decrease, and if it becomes acidic, then free calcium level will increase. But in both cases, total calcium obviously do not change. So how much change does occur? The free calcium changes by about 5%, which is a very, very high percentage. 5% change for each 0.1 unit change of pH. So ideally, say in the blood sample in the person, actually the pH was 7.4. Some amount of the value of, say, calcium was 10. So if the pH changes just by 0.1 unit, say the pH just increases by 0.1 from 7.4 to 7.5. After you collect the sample, the pH 7.42, it gone up to 7.5. Then the calcium will change by 5%. So the calcium that was 10 will now become 9.5, because we have said that if pH increases, the free calcium will decrease. So sorry, total calcium will not be 10, say total calcium was 5. The free calcium will change, the total calcium will not change. The free calcium was 5 when the pH was 7.4. If it increases to 7.5, then the free calcium will decrease by 5%. So which was 5, it will now become 4.75. So it will decrease pretty much. Okay. So the specimens, the bottom, the main important thing is that to prevent this, what you have to do, the specimen, if you have to analyze for free calcium, then its pH must be whatever the pH was in vivo. Okay, that means when the blood was inside the patient's body, then whatever the pH was, you have to measure the sample at that pH. You should not allow the pH to change in your sample after you have collected the sample. So you have to handle your sample very, very cautiously for that. So how do you do that? So ideally what you do, that if you want to measure free calcium, ideally you have to measure within 1 hour of sample collection. So you collect the sample and within 1 hour very quickly you measure the free calcium, so that you do not allow any time for pH in the sample to change. Okay, now what are the common causes for which the pH can change? Number one, if you keep the sample for too long, then in the blood sample, you know, carbon dioxide is dissolved in the blood sample, oxygen, carbon dioxide, everything is dissolved. More and more carbon dioxide will be lost to blood, lost to air. So the CO2 that was dissolved in blood will be diffusing out and it will go to air. So from blood, CO2 will be lost to air if you keep it for a long time. And CO2, you know, is with water converted to H2CO3. So more and more CO2 you lose, less and less will be the amount of H2CO3, which is the acid. So the amount of acid in your blood will decrease, so the pH will increase. So if you keep it for a long time, your CO2 can go out and your pH can become alkaline. On the other hand, if you keep the sample like that and your RBC is present in the sample, then RBC will keep on metabolizing, and RBC through anaerobic glycolysis, when metabolizes, it produces lactate, which is an acid, so that can on the other hand decrease the pH. So loss of CO2 can increase the pH, and RBC in the sample can produce lactate and decrease the pH, and both can change the level of free calcium. So how do you prevent that? What do you do to prevent these effects? Ideally you measure it within 1 hour. If you have to wait, what you do, you first collect the blood so that the sample is almost completely filled up and then tightly sealed. You fill up the vial completely and then tightly seal. So there is very little air in contact with the blood sample, so that no carbon dioxide can be lost to air. You fill up and tightly seal, so there is no air in contact, so CO2 cannot be lost and pH cannot increase. And secondly, what you do, then as quickly as possible you centrifuge the blood. You centrifuge the blood so that the serum can be separated, or plasma, serum or plasma, whatever the collection you have done, the serum or plasma can be separated, so the RBC is no longer present in the sample and it cannot metabolize and produce lactate and decrease the pH. So how do you measure it? If you measure free calcium, what are the precautions you need to do? You need to take, firstly, ideally you measure within 1 hour of sample collection, and if you have to wait, fill the vial up as much as possible, then very tightly seal it, and as quickly as possible centrifuge and separate the serum or plasma. Okay. Now then there is another interesting thing, adjusted calcium. You can see already that the total calcium level can vary depending on the amount of albumin. So if there is hypoalbuminemia, if somebody's albumin level is decreased, then the total calcium can decrease also. But that does not mean there is any problem in the calcium regulation, because regulation is only towards the free calcium. So say in your lab you are only measuring the total calcium, you don't have machine to measure free calcium, but you get a very low level of total calcium, but the patient is normal. So what can be? The situation can be that there is no problem with the calcium regulation, free calcium is normal, but total calcium has decreased due to albumin level decrease. Okay, so but you cannot measure the free calcium directly. So what do? What you do is you get a corrected total calcium value which depends on the albumin level. So you take 4 gram per dl of albumin as normal, and accordingly you calculate. So what is the formula? This formula that is highlighted, you can just look at this formula, that corrected total calcium will be total calcium whatever value you get plus 0.8 into 4 minus the albumin value actually. So if the albumin has decreased, then you add some amount. So if your albumin has decreased to 3, then the total calcium that you got plus 0.8 into 4 minus 3, that is 1. So 0.8 into 1, that is 0.8. So whatever total calcium you have got, you add 0.8 and then you compare with the reference range of total calcium. So that is your corrected total calcium. Okay, so if your albumin is low and you are comparing with the normal reference range of total calcium, then you will get a false idea that total calcium is too much low. But in those cases, if albumin is low, or in rare cases if albumin is high, but that is not much common, but low albumin is very common in many diseases. So if your patient has very low albumin and therefore you are getting a low total calcium, you can correct and get an idea of how to compare it with the reference range by this formula. So what total calcium you actually get plus 0.8 into 4 minus what albumin value you get. So lower and lower the albumin value, you have to correct it by adding more and more. Okay. Now finally, how you collect the sample, the specimen collection. Now the commonly what we do is measure serum calcium in serum, so we collect in clot blood. But if we have to measure it in the plasma, the only anticoagulant you can use is heparin. So heparinized blood you can use, but you can never use citrate or EDTA, because you can easily understand citrate, EDTA, these are also negatively charged things and they act as anticoagulant by binding with calcium. So if you used calcium citrate or EDTA, then they will bind your calcium and you will get a wrong result. So either clot blood, so serum calcium, or if you have to use an anticoagulant and want to measure the calcium in plasma, then the only anticoagulant you can use is heparin, clot or heparin, nothing else. Okay. And what are the common precautions pre-analytically you need to keep in your mind while measuring calcium? The first thing is, ideally you should not use tunicate. Okay, calcium is one parameter which when you want to measure, ideally you do not need to use a tunicate, because tunicate whatever you used, there is venous occlusion, very much venous occlusion, and there is increase in the protein bound calcium fraction. Okay, there is water reflux and there is increase in the protein bound calcium. So tunicate ideally do not use. If you have to use, then bind the tunicate and within very small time you collect the blood. And then the fist clinching, that is another thing. Make a fist and then you tell the patient make a fist, so that more and more venous engorgement you can easily collect the blood, but never tell that with respect to calcium, because whenever you are causing fist clenching, there is a muscular exercise, muscular contraction, and that will increase the lactate level in the blood and that will lower the pH. And by now you know that if you lower the pH, the free calcium level will change. So ideally do not use tunicate, and if have to use tunicate, use it for a very small time, very short time, and never tell for the fist clenching to the patient. So these are the things that you have to keep in mind while you collect sample for calcium. Thank you very much.